A little girl just buried her mother, and the man who was supposed to protect her threw her out like she was nothing. That moment happened in front of everyone. And one man, a man nobody expected, saw the whole thing. This is the story of little Emma, a 6-year-old girl who lost everything in one single day. Her mother, her home, her safety, all gone before the sun went down on the worst day of her life. But here is the thing about rock bottom. Sometimes the only people who stop to look down are the ones who have been there before. It was a gray Tuesday morning when Sarah Mitchell was buried. She was 31 years old, a nurse, a reader of bedtime stories, a woman who packed heart-shaped sandwiches in her daughter's lunchbox every single day, without fail. She died after a short illness that moved fast and gave no warnings. 1 month she was laughing at the kitchen table. The next she was gone. The only person she left behind was Emma, a tiny 6-year-old girl with her mother's brown eyes and a stuffed rabbit named Biscuit that she carried everywhere. Emma's stepfather, Daniel, had been in the picture for 2 years. He was not a warm man. He was the kind of person who never smiled unless something was in it for him. But Sarah loved him, and so Emma tried to love him too, the way children do, quietly, hopefully, without asking for much in return. At the funeral, Emma sat in the front row, small, still, holding Biscuit tight to her chest. She did not fully understand death the way adults do. She just knew her mother was in that box, and that she was not coming back. When it was over, people started leaving. One by one, the black coats disappeared. The flowers stayed. The silence stayed. And then Daniel crouched down in front of Emma. He looked her in the eyes, and he said, right there at the cemetery, that she was not his daughter, that he had no legal responsibility for her, that she needed to go with someone else because he was done, like she was a contract he was canceling. He stood up, walked to his car, and drove away. Emma stood there alone outside the cemetery gates. No coat, no bag, just Biscuit in her arms and nowhere to go. A few people nearby saw what happened. Most looked away. Some shook their heads. Nobody moved, except one man. His name was James Calloway, 54 years old, the kind of man you would walk past on the street and never look twice at. He wore a simple dark jacket, no tie, no watch that screamed money. He had come to the cemetery that day to visit the grave of his own mother, something he did every year on her birthday. He was walking back to his car when he saw Emma. He stopped. He watched Daniel drive away. He looked at this tiny girl standing alone with a stuffed rabbit, and something inside him, something old and deep, cracked open. James Calloway was not just any man. He had built a logistics company from nothing, starting with one truck he could barely afford and a loan from a credit union that almost said no. His company was now worth a little over $300 million. He had been on the cover of 2 business magazines. He had an assistant, a driver, and 3 homes across the country. He also had a memory. When James was 7 years old, his own father left. Just walked out one morning and did not come back. His mother worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on. There were nights they ate crackers for dinner. There were winters with no heating. He knew exactly what it felt like to be small and cold, and unwanted by the person who was supposed to stay. He walked over to Emma. He sat down on the low cemetery wall so his eyes were level with hers. He did not tower over her. He did not rush. He just sat there and said very gently, "Hi, my name is James. What's yours?" Emma looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Emma, and this is Biscuit." James nodded seriously, like meeting Biscuit was important business. "Are you waiting for someone?" he asked. Emma shook her head slowly. He did not panic. He did not pull out his phone and call someone to deal with it. He stayed right there, asked if she was cold, took off his jacket and put it around her shoulders, and then sat with her while he quietly called his lawyer and then a social services contact he trusted personally. But what happened next was not just a phone call. Over the following days, James Calloway did something that nobody expected, including his own team. He hired a private family attorney. He tracked down Emma's maternal grandmother, a woman named Ruth who lived 4 hours away and had no idea what Daniel had done. Ruth had been trying to reach Emma for days and getting no answer. She was out of her mind with worry. James paid for Ruth to travel. He paid for emergency temporary legal guardianship paperwork to be processed fast. He checked Emma into a warm hotel with Ruth while the paperwork moved through the system, and he covered every single cost without telling anyone or making a press release about it. He also did something quiet that mattered more than the money. He visited Emma 3 times that week. Not to be seen. Not for photos. He brought her colored pencils and a drawing book because Ruth mentioned Emma liked to draw. He sat at the little hotel table and he drew badly shaped dogs while Emma laughed at him and drew better ones. He was just present, in a way that Daniel had never been. When Ruth officially became Emma's legal guardian 12 days later, Emma had already started calling James her pencil friend. Ruth cried when she found out the full extent of what James had done. She had expected help from no one. She had prepared herself to fight this alone with no money and no connections. James told her in his plain and quiet way that nobody should have to fight alone for a child, and that was the end of the conversation about it. The story might have stayed private forever, except one of the social workers involved, moved by what she had witnessed, wrote about it, without names and on a community forum for people who work with children in crisis. She described a wealthy man who sat on a cold cemetery wall and took off his jacket for a 6-year-old, who did not perform kindness, who just did it. The post was shared 40,000 times in 3 days. People were hungry for it, because this is the world we live in now, where a man driving away from a child at her mother's funeral feels almost normal, and a man who stops and stays feels like a miracle. But here is what stayed with me about this story. James Calloway was not a saint. He was not doing this for a tax break or a headline. He was a man who had been a cold and frightened child once. And he saw that child again, standing outside a cemetery gate holding a stuffed rabbit. That is all it was. Emma is doing well now. She lives with Ruth in a small house with a garden where she is allowed to grow strawberries. She still has Biscuit. She still draws dogs. And she has a pencil friend who sends her colored pencil sets in the mail every few months with a little note that just says, "Keep drawing." Ruth says Emma talks about her mother every day, that she is not forgotten and they do not ask her to. They just love her forward. Daniel was later investigated after additional reports came in about his conduct. That story is still unfolding. And James Calloway went back to work the following Monday, sat at his desk and said nothing about any of it to anyone in his office, because some things are not done to be seen. They are done because a child is standing in the cold and you are the one who happened to be there.